Hello, darkness, my old friend. I've come to talk with you again, because a vision softly creeping left its seeds while I was sleeping, and the vision that was planted in my brain still remains within the sound of silence. In restless dreams I walked alone, narrow streets of cobblestone, neath the halo of a street lamp. I turned my collar to the cold and damp, when my eyes were stabbed by the flash of a neon light that split the night and touched the sound of silence. And in the naked light I saw 10,000 people, maybe more, people talking without speaking, people hearing without listening, people writing songs and voices never shared, and no one dared disturb the sound of silence. Fool said I, you do not know, silence like a cancer grows. Hear my words that I might teach you, take my arms that I might reach you, but my words like silent raindrops fell and echoed in the wells of silence, and the people bowed and prayed to the neon god they made, and the sign flashed out its warning, and the words that it was forming, and the sign said the words of the prophets are written on the subway walls, in tenement halls, and whispered in the sound of silence. You come to me with scars on your wrist. You tell me this will be the last night feeling like this.
I just came to say goodbye. Didn't want you to see me cry. I'm fine,
But I know it's alright. This is the last night you'll spend alone. Look me in the eye so I know you never have everywhere you wanted to be. The last night you'll spend alone. I'll wrap you in my arms and I won't let everything is your fault. But they don't know you like I know you. They don't know you at all.
I'm so sick of when they say it's just a phase, you'll be okay, you're fine.
But I know it's a lie. This is the last night you'll spend alone. Look me in the eye so I know you know I've everywhere you want me to be. The last night you'll spend alone. I'll wrap you in my arms and I won't let go. I've everything you need me to be. Last night away from me. The night is so long when everything's wrong. If you give me your hand, I will help you hold on tonight. This is the last night you'll spend alone. Look me in the eye so I know you know I'm everywhere you want me to be. The last night you'll spend alone. I'll wrap you in my arms and I won't let go. I'm everything you need me to be. I won't let you say goodbye, and I'll be your reason why. The last night away from me, away from me.
Wishing on a dandelion can't help prevent pregnancy after unprotected sex or birth control failure. Plan B One Step can help. Use as directed. Take it within 72 hours after unprotected sex. The sooner it's taken, the better it works. There's no prescription needed. Get a $10 coupon.
This world will never be what I expected. And if I don't belong, who would have guessed it? I will not leave alone everything that I own to make you feel like it's not too late. It's never too late. Even if I say it'll be alright, still I hear you say you want to end your life. Now and again we try to just stay alive. Maybe we'll turn it around, 'cause it's not too late. It's never too late. No one will ever see this side reflected. And if there's something wrong, who would have guessed it? And I have left alone everything that I own to make you feel like it's not too late. It's never too late. Even if I say it'll be alright, still I hear you say you want to end your life. Now and again we try to just don't belong. Even if I say it'll be alright, still I hear you say you want to end your life. Now and again we try to just stay alive. Maybe we'll turn it around, 'cause it's not too late. It's never too late. Maybe we'll turn it around, 'cause it's not too late. It's never too late. It's not too late. It's never too late. This world will never be what I expected. And if I don't belong, who would have guessed it? I will not leave alone everything that I own to make you feel like it's not too late. It's never too late. Even if I say it'll be alright, still I hear you say you want to end your life. Now and again we try to just stay alive. Maybe we'll turn it around, 'cause it's not too late. It's never too late. No one will ever see this side reflected. And if there's something wrong, who would have guessed it? And I have left alone everything that I own to make you feel like it's not too late. It's never too late. Even if I say it'll be alright, still I hear you say you want to end your life. Now and again we try to just stay alive. Maybe we'll turn it around, 'cause it's not too late. It's never too late. The world we knew won't come back. The time we've lost can't get back. The life we had won't be ours again. This world will never be what I expected. And if I don't belong, even if I say it'll be alright, still I hear you say you want to end your life. Now and again we try to just stay alive. Maybe we'll turn it around, 'cause it's not too late. It's never too late. Maybe we'll turn it around, 'cause it's not too late. It's never too late. It's not too late. It's never too late. This world will never be what I expected. And if I don't fix when you fall down. You know you need to find a way to get you through another day. Let me be the one to numb you out. Let me be the one to hold you, never gonna let you get away. The shoulder you cry on, the toast that you die on. I can be your pain killer, killer, killer. Love me till it's all over, over. 'Cause I'm the shoulder you cry on, the toast that you die on. I can be your pain killer, killer, killer. I know what you want so desperately. You know I'll give you one for free. Forever you're coming back to me. Now I'm gonna give you what you need. 'Cause I know what you feed on and what you lean on and what you lean on. The shoulder you cry on, the toast that you die on. I can be your pain killer, killer, killer. Love me till it's all over, over. 'Cause I'm the shoulder you cry on, the toast that you die on. I can be your pain killer, killer, killer. Did you find another cure? Did you find another I can be your pain killer, killer, killer. Love me till it's all over, over. 'Cause I'm the shoulder you cry on, the toast that you die on. I can be your pain killer, killer, killer. Pain killer. You know you need a fix when you fall down. You know you need to find a way to get you through another day. Let me be the one to numb you out. Let me be the one to hold you, never gonna let you get away. The shoulder you cry on, the toast that you die on. I can be your pain killer, killer, killer. Love me till it's all over, over. 'Cause I'm the shoulder you cry on, the toast that you die on. I can be your pain killer, killer, killer. I know what you want so desperately. You know I'll give you one for free.
I can deduct this, right?
You stuck? H&R Block Online has experts standing by.
So I can chat with them?
I walk alone, think of home memories of long ago. No one knows I lost my soul long ago. Lied too much. She said that she's had enough. Am I too much? She said that she's had enough. Standing on my like she told me I'm just a big disgrace. Lied too much. She said that she's had enough. Am I too much? She said that she's had enough. Standing on my own, remembering the one I left at home. Forget about the life I used to know. Forget about the one I left at home. So now I'm standing here alone. I'm learning how to live life on my own. Lied too much. I think that I've had enough. Am I too much? She said that she's had enough. I'm standing on my own, remembering the one I left at home. Forget about the life I used to know. Forget about the one I left at home. So now I'm standing here alone. I'm learning how to live life on my own. Forget about the past, I'll never know. Forget about the one I left at home. I walk alone, think of home memories of long ago. No one knows I lost my soul long ago. Lied too much. She said that she's had enough. Am I too much? She said that she's had enough. Standing on my own, remembering the one I left at home. Forget about the life I used to know. Forget about the one I left at home. I need to run far away, can't go back to that place. Like she told me I'm just a big disgrace. Lied too much. She said that she's had enough. Am I too much? She said that she's had enough. Standing on my own, remembering the one I left at home. Forget about the life I used to know. Forget about the one I left No time for goodbye, he said, as he faded away. Don't put your life in someone's hands, they're bound to steal it away. Don't hide your mistakes, 'cause they'll find you, burn you. Then he said, if you wanna get out alive, run for your life. If you wanna get out alive, run for your life. This is my last time, she said, as she faded away. It's hard to imagine, but one day you'll end up like me. Then she said, if you wanna get out alive, run for your life. If you wanna get out alive, run for your life. If you wanna get out alive, run for your life. If you wanna get out alive, run for your life. If I stay, it won't be long till I'm burning on the inside. If I go, I can only hope that I'll make it to the other side. If you wanna get out alive, run for your life. If you wanna get out alive, run for. If you wanna get out alive, run for your life. If you wanna get out alive, run for. If I stay, it won't be long till I'm burning on the inside. If I go, I can only hope that I'll make it to the other side. If I stay, it won't be long till I'm burning on the inside. If I go, and if I go, burning on the inside. Burning on the inside. Burning on the inside.
When superheroes get sick, they reach for Mucinex Cold and Flu All-in-One.
Never thought I'd feel this guilty and I'm broken down inside. Living with myself, nothing but lies. I always thought I'd make it, but never knew I'd let it get so bad. Living with myself is all I have. I feel numb, I can't come to life. I feel like I'm frozen in time. Living in a world so cold, wasting away. Living in a shell with no soul. Since you've gone away, living in a world so cold, counting the days. Since you've gone away, you've gone away. Do you ever feel me? Do you ever look deep down inside, staring at yourself, paralyzed? I feel numb, I can't come to life. I feel like I'm frozen in time. Living in a world so cold, wasting away. Living in a shell with no soul. Since you've gone away, living in a world thought I'd feel this. I told you I was hurt, bleeding on the inside. I told you I was lost in the middle of my life. There's times I stayed alive for you. There's times I would have died for you. There's times it didn't matter at all. Will you help me find the right way up, or let me take the wrong way down? Will you straighten me out, or make me take the long way around? I took the low road in, I'll take the high road out. I'll do whatever it takes to be the mistake you can't live without. Standing in the dark, I can see your shadow. You're the only light that's breaking through the window. There's times I stayed alive for you. There's times I would have died for you. There's times it didn't matter at all. Will you help me find the right way up, or let me take the wrong way down? Will you straighten me out, or make me take the long way around? I took the low road in, I'll take the high road out. I'll do whatever it takes to be the mistake you can't live without. Well, I'm not gonna give it away, not gonna let it go, just to wake up someday gone, gone. The worst part is looking back and knowing that I was wrong. Help me find the right way up, or let me take the wrong way down. Will you straighten me out, or make me take the...
The summer was nice and warm that year. The sun, as always, brought warmth to your skin. The light breezes that swept through the neighborhood made the days not so hot or cold. It was simply perfect weather. But one summer Sally will never forget. Sally was a young girl, 8 years old, long, curly brown hair, and bright green eyes. She was always polite, she never lied, and did as she was told. Her mother and father simply adored her. They couldn't ask for a better daughter. Sally giggled as she played with her friends outside their home. Various games like hopscotch and jump rope, even dolls and tag. Sally's mother smiled warmly at the innocent sight and wiped her hands upon her apron, calling out, "Sally, come inside now, it's time for lunch." Sally looked up from her doll and smiled. "Okay, Mommy." Sitting down at the dinner table, Sally lightly bounced in her seat, excited for who knows what. Her mother placed down a peanut butter and jelly sandwich with the crust cut off, some carrot and celery sticks on the side, and nice juice to drink. "Thank you, Mama." "You're welcome, sweetie." As the child began to take hold of her sandwich, her mother took a seat across from the girl and smiled, watching her eat. "Guess what? Your Uncle Johnny is coming over." Sally looked up and smiled. The corners of her lips had traces of peanut butter on them. Uncle Johnny?" she replied through her food. Her mother laughed and nodded. He's coming to help Daddy with his job, and to look after you, too. Maybe all of us can go to the carnival, too." Sally chewed the rest of her bite quickly and swallowed. "Can Sarah and Jenny come, too?" Her mother looked up and thought. "Well, that's up to their mom and dads to say, but if they can, sure." Again the child giggled and bounced in her seat again. now even more excited for this year's summer vacation. Over the course of the next few days, Uncle Johnny drove up to the house. Climbing out of his car, the man stretched his arms over his head and let out a tired sigh. "Uncle Johnny!" a small voice chirped, earning the attention of the man. Sally dropped the jump rope she was playing with and ran over to the family member, hugging him. "Hey, Sal, how have you been?" he asked, lifting the girl up with ease, giving her a proper hug. The girl giggled and looked back at her friends, who were now waving in their direction. "I've been playing with Sarah and Jenny. Let's go inside and tell Mama you're here." "Sounds like a good idea." He smiled and walked inside the house, calling out to the woman. "Marie, I'm here," he called, followed by Sally mimicking him. "Mama, he's here." The housewife hurried out of the kitchen and smiled to see Johnny made it. "Johnny, you're here safe and sound." The man placed the girl down on the ground and gave her bottom a pat to send her off, and hugged the woman. "Of course I did. Why else wouldn't I come here safe and sound?" He laughed, walking into the kitchen with the woman. Sally trotted over to the front door, calling out that she was going back outside to play. "Make sure you come in before dark." "Yes, ma'am." And off the girls went. As dinner drew near, Sally's father came home, happy to see his brother was there as well. Walking in with his daughter, he strolled up to Johnny with a handshake and hug. "Nice to see you, man. How have you been?" he asked, crossing his arms, watching his wife set the table up for supper. Johnny gave a shrug of his shoulders, fiddled with his thumbs. "Me and Karen split up." "Oh, that's terrible. I'm sorry." Johnny shook his head with a smile. "Nah, it's all right. I'm happy. I can move freely without having someone constantly wanting to know where I am and what I'm doing." The two men laughed together, and making their way to the table to eat. Marie, this is wonderful." "Thank you. I'm glad you like it." It's yummy, Mama." Adults smiled and chuckled from their child's praise. Plate after plate was empty, and Sally began to yawn over and over again, rubbing her eyes with her hands. Her mother smiled and gently rubbed her back. "Looks like someone's tired. Time for bed." Sally nodded and hopped off her seat, picking up her plate and carrying it over to the sink. Her mother rose up to take her to bed, but stopped from John grabbing a hold of her arm. "I'll take her to bed," he smiled, earning one in return. "All right. Thank you, John." The man nodded, watching the woman making her way to clean dishes and put up the leftovers. Then looked to see his brother leaving for the bathroom to wash up, and followed after the young girl to her room. John smiled and closed the door behind him, watching the girl rummage around through her dresser for pajamas to wear. "Do you need any help?" he asked, watching the girl look up and nod. "Okay, let's see what you got." The man waltzed up beside her and began looking through her various pajamas. "You've got some strawberry printed ones. I bet you'll smell just like them in your dreams." He took the shirt up and showed her, giving it a few inhales. Sally giggled and shook her head, indicating she didn't want to wear her strawberry pajamas. Johnny nodded and placed the shirt back, and picked up another shirt with a unicorn on it. "How about this one? I bet you'll ride on Miss Unicorn here." Again the child giggled and shook her head no. The man let out a small huff before putting it back. Then took out a regular white nightgown. "How about this? Be able to turn into a princess with this." Sally's eyes lit up and clapped her hands excitedly, and nodded. Placing the gown on her bed, he reached over to her and began to unbutton her shirt. "I can get dressed, Uncle," she said with a smile, looking down at his hands on her shirt. The man smiled back and nodded, continuing to work his way down her shirt. "I bet you can. But you're tired, and why not have some help?" he asked, watching Sally nod a few times. Once getting her shirt unbuttoned, he slipped it off her shoulders and gave her tummy a nice poke, making her giggle. He grinned, took a hold of the rim of her shorts, and pulled them down. Finally, the man grabbed a hold of her nightgown and pushed the opening over her head, making sure her arms could go through the sleeves. "All done," he said happily, watching the girl smile back, giggling, when she bounded on top of her bed. Johnny rose up and picked up her clothes. The door opened up, and in walked Sally's mother, coming to tuck her in. "You ready for bed?" she asked, walking around the bed. Johnny looked up and hurried over to the other side of the bed. "I'll tuck her in. That okay?" Marie looked up at him, smiled, shaking her head. "Of course." She looked down at her daughter and leaned in, kissing the child on the forehead. "Good night, sweetheart." "Good night, Mama." Giving the girl a gentle rub with her thumb on her forehead, the woman took the clothes Johnny had and made her way out of the room. Johnny smiled to the mother and walked over to the light switch, flicking it off. He carefully closed the door to her room and locked it. Slowly he looked over his shoulder towards Sally. Johnny wore a chilling, crooked smile. After the next few days, Marie noticed that Sally wasn't acting herself. She wasn't smiling as brightly as she did. She wasn't chipper, or spoke with the same amount of happiness. Marie took a hold of the child's hand before she left to play with her friends, and took her aside. Sally looked up at her mother with a confused look. "Honey, are you feeling okay?" she asked, kneeling down to be at Sally's height. Sally stared at her idly, and slowly began to weep. Her mother widened her eyes in confusion. "Sally?" "Mama, I didn't want to," the girl managed to say through hiccup sobs. Didn't want to what, sweetie?" I didn't want to play. I didn't want to play his game." The child looked at her mother and hugged her tight. "He touched me and made me touch him." Marie frowned and gently began to stroke the child's hair, comforting her, lightly shushing her to calm her down. "Shh, it's okay. Mama's here now." It was a nightmare, that's all. The girl had a scary nightmare. "Everything is fine now, okay? Don't worry about it anymore." She watched Sally look up at her. Her breathing chopped up from her crying, and she smiled. "Okay, Mama." Her mother smiled and kissed her forehead. "Now go wash up. Don't want to play with your friends with a dirty face." Sally let out a little giggle and ran off to the bathroom to wash her face. Later that day, Johnny and his brother came back from work. Frank sighed, smiling while he saw Sally wave at him. The father waved back and closed the car door, making his way up to the house. Johnny looked at Sally as well and smiled, waving to her. The child's smile slowly wilted, showing less happiness in it, but waved back as well. Johnny also walked inside the house and paused when he heard the conversation between his brother and his wife. "Sally what?" Frank asked. "She had a nightmare, a very bad one. She said he touched her." "Well, who the hell is he?" "I don't know, Frank. But it was only a nightmare. I just wanted to inform you of what's been going on with her and why she's acting different." Johnny furrowed his brow in anger. His knuckles turned white, then calmed down quickly. Thinking fast, he put on a smile and walked into the room, making it look like he just walked into their conversation, and rose his brow. Whoops, did I interrupt something?" he asked, watching the couple shake their heads. Johnny smiled again and thumbed back into the direction of the car. "I'm gonna head to the store. You need anything, Marie?" The woman smiled and looked towards the kitchen. "Yes, actually, can you get me some eggs, milk, bread, and juice?" Johnny nodded, about to leave until he paused. Sally wanted to come along too. Just wanted to inform you." Marie smiled. "Thank you, John." He nodded again and made his way out of the house, keys in hand, looking out to Sally with her friends. He cupped his hands over his mouth. "Sally!" The child looked up at him and stared. "Come on, let's go to the store." John made his way over to the car, gesturing for the girl to follow him. Sally sat there for a moment, then placed her dolls on the grass. "I'll be back. Please watch over Marzipan and Lily for me." Jenny and Sarah smiled and nodded, continuing to play their game of dolls without her. Sally reluctantly made her way around the car, climbing into the passenger seat and buckling herself in. "Did Mama want you to go to the store?" she asked. Johnny nodded and put the keys into the ignition, turning it, and backing out of the driveway. "Yep. She wanted me to get some food for her. Maybe I can get you something, too." He grinned, looking down at the child. Sally nervously smiled back and looked ahead, watching the scenery pass by. As soon as they got to the road leading to the store, Sally noticed he wasn't slowing down to turn into the parking lot. She furrowed her brow, confused, and looked up at him. Uncle Johnny, the store is back that way," she said, pointing in the direction of the Whole Food store. But nothing came from the man. He just continued driving, a very faint smile on his face. The child sat up and looked past the back seat, watching the store slowly grow smaller till it was out of sight. Realizing they weren't going to the grocery store, the child watched her uncle drive into the small parking lot in the community park near town. No one went to the park on Sundays. Sally felt nervous. Her breathing quickened, watching the man with wide eyes. Johnny put the car into park and turned the ignition off, looking to the child, anger obviously showing in his features. "You told your mom what happened, didn't you?" he asked, watching the girl frantically shake her head no. "You're not playing the game right, Sally." His tone almost had a slight singing to it. The man reached over and pulled the girl to him, ignoring the struggling she was putting up and her whimpering pleas. "You said you'd play the game with me, Sally. You lied to me." Opening the car door beside him, the man climbed out along with the child and shoved her to the ground, quickly pinning her down, ignoring the cries and writhing the child was making. "You have to be punished now for breaking the rules," he said in that slightly singing tone, and began to unbuckle his belt. This just in. A couple finds the body of 8-year-old Sally Williams in the community park. The week-long search is now closed. More tonight at 9. She could have sworn that she closed her door before climbing into bed. Guess I forgot. Getting up from the warmth and comfort of her bed, the teen made her way across the room to shut the door. Before she could climb back into her covers, a creak outside in the hall rose up. Were her parents up? They must have checked on her to see if she was sleeping or something. As soon as she got her legs covered up, the teen froze to hear a faint sound of crying, though it sounded like a child. Slowly rising up from bed once more, the girl made her way to the door and opened it. The crying seemed to be louder outside her room. Peering down the darkness, the teen crept down the hallway, following the sounds of the whimpering. Once getting to the end of the hall, the girl gasped. Sitting on the floor in front of the moonlit window was a little girl. She was hunched over, crying. How did she get into their house? Through the window? Swallowing hard, the teen spoke. Who are you? How did you get into my house? She asked. Suddenly the crying stopped. The child slowly moved her trembling hands away from her face and looked behind her, twitching lightly. Blood replaced her tears, staining her hands. There was a deep clot of blood and hair on the side of her head, blood leaking from the wound down her face and onto her dirty nightgown. Her bright green eyes seemed like they saw right through her soul. "This is my house," the child spoke, her voice raspy, sounding as if she's struggling to speak. The girl's body twitched and wiggled oddly as she rose to her feet and turned to face the teen. Her feet were dirty, as if she was running through mud. Scrapes covered her knees and legs, and the end of her gown was torn and tattered. The name Sally sewn into the front. Reaching out with her blood-soaked hand, the girl slowly smiled, blood staining her teeth as she spoke. "Play with me."
"2018 for many was a year littered with tragedy. Things such as murder, accidents, natural disasters, and much, much more have changed the lives of people all over the globe in 2018. And today, we recount some of the very worst of these events. We have, however, decided to pass over some of the more obvious stories in order to shed more light on lesser-known ones that you may have missed. Now, let's begin. On August 26, 2018, a woman returned to her Chicago apartment at approximately 4 a.m. after a long night at work. She picked up on the smell of smoke coming from somewhere in the building and quickly called 911 before warning as many of her neighbors as she could. But unfortunately, for some, it was already too late. Firefighters did everything in their power to get everyone to safety, but by the time they arrived, 8 people had succumbed to their injuries, and even more tragic was the fact that 6 of them were children, ranging between the ages of 3 and 16. One of the survivors, also a minor, died at the hospital a few days later, bringing the total number of lives lost to 9. Upon further inspection, it was discovered that the fire had started at the rear of the building and that the front exits were clear, but the residents did not have smoke alarms to wake them up in time to escape. The exact cause of the fire is still undetermined, but investigators believe it was either caused by fireworks or a stray cigarette. In the early hours of August 24, 2018, a resident of Montgomery County, Texas, awoke to the sound of his doorbell ringing. By the time he arrived to see who it was, however, whoever had been there was long gone. Puzzled, the man reviewed his surveillance feed, and what he found was footage of a woman, disheveled, disoriented, wearing only a t-shirt, no shoes, and what appeared to be broken restraints around her wrist. The resident immediately contacted authorities, who then posted the video to the internet along with screenshots, anything to help in identifying this mystery woman who is now believed to have rang the doorbells of up to 5 households during the night the video of her was captured. Naturally, the internet started coming up with theories. Many tried searching through the missing persons logs from around the area and surrounding states, but none were confirmed to be a match. Some even assumed that the incident was an elaborate hoax, and others considered the possibility that perhaps she was an escaped patient from a nearby psychiatric facility. Unfortunately, though, the truth was soon revealed to be much, much more troubling than anyone had previously imagined. On August 29th, less than a week after the incident, a 49-year-old man by the name of Dennis Ray Collins was discovered dead in his home from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Authorities were able to locate the body after Collins' ex-wife had reported receiving alarming text messages from him, leading her to believe he could possibly be considering ending his own life. On top of this, Collins' ex-wife also provided police with the information they had been so desperately in need of in order to identify the woman in the video from a few days earlier. According to her, she believed the woman to be her ex-husband's girlfriend, and this, indeed, turned out to be true. The woman was later found in the care of her family and remains publicly unnamed due to the fact that she had been subjected to physical and sexual abuse at the hands of Collins. According to her, the restraints seen within the video were used to keep her tied down to a bed, but on the night the video was captured, she was able to break free and seek help. Without a phone or anyone on the streets at 3 a.m., she resorted to ringing the doorbells of nearby homes in the hopes that someone would come to her rescue. Unable to find help, the woman returned back to Collins' home, but fortunately was able to contact her family, who ushered her to safety soon after. A suicide note was discovered alongside Collins' body. In it, he confessed to being responsible for the state his girlfriend was in within the video, and he also mentioned being aware of just how widespread the clip had become. In 2010, a 19-year-old Australian college student by the name of Sam Ballard was enjoying a night of drinking at a friend's backyard in Sydney. In the midst of all the fun, the group noticed a garden slug on the nearby pavement, and that's when the question was presented. As so many young people would, the boys began egging each other on about who would eat the creature, and that's when Sam volunteered. Naturally, at first, there seemed to be nothing wrong, but not long after ingesting the slug, Sam began to complain of weakness and an intense pain in his legs. At first, Sam's mother bet on the possibility of multiple sclerosis, as it ran in the family, but doctors disagreed. With no diagnosis in sight, Sam mentioned the slug to his mother, and while at first she figured there was no way eating a simple garden slug could cause such issues, it was later confirmed that the slug had been infected by a parasite. Sam had developed rat lungworm disease. As the name implies, the parasite is a type of nematode that resides within the lungs of rats before eventually being passed on to other creatures such as slugs and snails, where their larvae can flourish before continuing the cycle. Humans are not normally this parasite's target, but they can become infected after ingesting infected water, vegetables, or undercooked snails and slugs. Once in the system, the larvae are spread throughout the body via blood and can cause serious complications to the central nervous system. In Sam's case, the lungworms caused him to slip into a coma lasting over 400 days. Once Sam awoke, the damage was so severe that he was mostly paralyzed, unable to complete basic functions on his own, and unable to eat without the use of a tube. Unfortunately, Sam never recovered, and in November of 2018, over 8 long years after the day that changed his life forever, Sam Ballard passed away at a hospital not far from where he grew up, surrounded by his closest friends and family members. January 2018. A 17-year-old girl makes her escape from her family home in Paris, California. She is scared, weak, and so malnourished that authorities later described her as having the appearance of a 10-year-old. The girl was able to lead police back to her family home, which would soon become known to millions as the House of Horrors. There, police found the girl's 12 siblings bound by chains and padlocks, clearly suffering from abuse and severe malnourishment. The siblings range from the ages of 2 all the way to 29 years old, but despite this, all 13 were mistaken as minors. Much like the 17-year-old who managed to escape, the 7 adult siblings were so frail they almost appeared to be children. One of the siblings, aged 12, weighed as much as a 7-year-old, while the eldest sibling weighed just 82 pounds, despite being 29 years of age. Police immediately took the parents into custody. David and Louise Turpin, ages 56 and 49, were charged with torture, abuse of both children and dependent adults, neglect, false imprisonment, and lewd acts on a child under the age of 14. After the arrest, more information on the lives of the Turpin siblings began to emerge, detailing both their struggle and the backwards mentality of their parents. According to the siblings, on top of being fed just barely enough to survive, they were only allowed to shower about once every year and hadn't been seen by a doctor in over 4 years. The children would be punished for stealing food, and at one point, one of the Turpin children was allegedly strangled by their mother as punishment for using the internet to watch a video of Justin Bieber. The Turpin siblings had been mostly isolated from the outside world. Neighbors expressed shock at the news that so many people had been living right next to them for so long and in such poor conditions without their knowledge. The isolation was so severe that, according to those involved with the case, some of the younger children didn't even know what a police officer was. David and Louise Turpin both pled not guilty to all charges, but are still facing 94 years to life in prison for the atrocities their children suffered at their hands. This photo, posted by up-and-coming Instagram stars Meenakshi Murthy and Vishnu Viswanath, is full of energy, beauty, and enthusiasm. Originally from India, the couple relocated to California a few years ago and began documenting their many adventures throughout the United States in breathtaking photos featuring everywhere from New York City to the Grand Canyon. Their Instagram account, Holidays and Happily Ever Afters, was quickly gaining a following, over 10,000 by the time of their final post. There, the couple could be seen doing various activities such as skydiving, canoeing, and celebrating special events, just to name a few. In March of 2018, the couple posted this photo along with a caption warning of the dangers of extreme stunts in the name of views, pointing out that even when you think you're safe, something as simple as a gust of wind could cause things to end in tragedy. Is our life just worth one photo? The couple asked their followers. Unfortunately, Meenakshi and Vishnu would soon fall victim to the very thing they had implored people to be weary of just a few months before. During their final trip, the couple found themselves in Yosemite National Park, and of course, they began setting up to take photos to post to their account, but the two were never heard from again. Sometime later, a group of tourists noticed camera equipment at the top of Taft Point, and based on the scene, it was quite apparent what had happened to whoever left the gear where it stood. The bodies of Meenakshi and Vishnu were discovered immediately following this, resting over 1,000 feet below where they last stood. Whether the fall was caused by a loss of footing or a sudden gust of wind is unclear, but the couple will always be remembered not just for their knack for photography, but also for their enthusiasm for travel. On December 22, 2018, at roughly 9:30 p.m., the people of Java and Sumatra, Indonesia, were struck by a devastating tsunami that ultimately resulted in over 430 deaths, thousands injured, and dozens more unable to be located by their families. One of the main factors that contributed to the severity of this tragic event was the fact that the people of Indonesia were taken completely by surprise, allowing them no time to evacuate or brace themselves in any way. This was due to the unique cause of the tsunami. Rather than an earthquake, the massive surge was started when a nearby volcano by the name of Anak Krakatau erupted, causing a massive 158-acre section of the volcano to collapse into the surrounding sea. Unfortunately, this event was completely unpredictable. Some of the most compelling footage shot that evening depicts a performance by local pop group 17 in the moments leading up to impact. All seems normal until a massive wave suddenly hits the stage from behind, causing it to immediately collapse. The water consumes the entire band in just mere seconds as the audience screams in sheer horror. Unfortunately, every member of 17 aside from their vocalist perished that night. To make matters worse, the singer's wife, a popular TV personality, was one of the many initially reported missing, but was later found to have also passed away during the tsunami. This is just one person's story, but thousands more were affected, and those who survived now had to face the horrible aftermath of the tsunami's destruction. Thousands of homes were damaged, and many more were unfortunately completely swept away. In October of 2018, Facebook users were horrified by a disturbing viral video of an infant being drowned by her mother making its way throughout the site. In the clip, the woman filming remains obscured, but the infant can clearly be seen being held by her ankles before being dunked headfirst into the water several times. While all of this is taking place, the mother can be heard weeping, talking about not wanting the baby anymore and asking, "Is this what you want?" As it turns out, the disturbing clip was shot by 27-year-old LaConda Mosley, who sent the video via Facebook to the baby's father, who then quickly contacted the authorities. Living out of state, the father could only pray that the police arrived in time, and they fortunately did. In screenshots later released to the public, it was revealed that LaConda threatened to kill the baby if the father didn't send her money immediately. Ultimately, LaConda was arrested and charged with felony aggravated assault, child abuse, and terroristic threatening. Tragedy struck the people of Ankara, Turkey in the early hours of December 13, 2018, after a high-speed passenger train collided head-on with a locomotive. Footage of the crash shows that upon impact, part of the passenger train came into contact with an overpass, causing it to come crashing down on the already devastated scene. Approximately 206 passengers were on board that morning, 6 of which would unfortunately pass away during the accident. 3 train conductors also lost their lives during the crash, bringing the total death count up to 9. Initially, it was also reported that up to 46 people were injured during the incident, but that number has since been revised to 84. Local investigators have been working to figure out the cause of the accident and took 3 state railway employees into custody under suspicion of negligence. However, many point to wider issues such as cost cutting, which both engineering and rail worker unions insist is doing far more harm than good. The Humboldt Broncos are a Canadian junior hockey team established in 1970 that play as a part of the Saskatchewan Junior Hockey League, or the SJHL for short. By April of 2018, the Humboldt Broncos had secured a spot in the SJHL semifinals, but unfortunately would never make it. At approximately 5 p.m. on April 6th, the team was heading to their next game, eventually finding themselves about to pass through the intersection of Highway 35 and 335 near Armley. Before they could do so, their coach bus was suddenly struck by a semi-trailer traveling at over 60 miles per hour. According to reports, the driver of the semi failed to yield at a flashing stop sign, and because of this, the resulting collision took the lives of 16 out of the 30 people involved and injured 13 more. Once this tragic crash made the news, the public began showing their condolences through various means. Vigils and tributes were held, and at one point a GoFundMe was made in order to support the families of those lost. In just over a week, the campaign reached over $15 million in funds, making it Canada's most successful since the site's creation. As for the driver of the semi-truck, he survived and was identified as 29-year-old Jaskirat Singh Sidhu. On July 6, 2018, Sidhu was charged with 16 counts of dangerous operation of a motor vehicle causing death and 13 counts of dangerous operation of a motor vehicle causing bodily injury. According to recent updates to the story on January 8th, Sidhu pled guilty to all charges. On October 12, 2018, inspectors in eastern Detroit received an anonymous letter pointing them in the direction of the former Cantrell Funeral Home, a place they were, unfortunately, all too familiar with. The letter informed inspectors of a hidden compartment within the funeral home's ceiling, and once they finally reached it, they discovered the unthinkable. Within the false ceiling were the badly decomposed bodies of 11 infants, 9 of which were placed within a box and wrapped in trash bags, while the other 2 were kept within a casket. According to those present at the scene, the compartment was so well hidden that it was unlikely it would have ever been discovered had it not been for the anonymous letter they received earlier that day. By the time of this discovery, Cantrell Funeral Home had already been closed for over 6 months. Back in April, state regulators had shut the establishment down after finding 2 moldy bodies that were embalmed but wrongfully stored in an unrefrigerated garage for what appeared to be weeks. A third body was also discovered in a similar condition, but with what inspectors described as unknown fluids covering the corpse's face. When approached for an explanation, Raymond Cantrell, the funeral home's owner, told reporters that he'd been storing the bodies as a favor until the families could afford the cost of their funerals. Whether or not this was also the reasoning behind storing the infants' bodies in the ceiling remains unclear, but unfortunately, this isn't the end of this story for Detroit. Just 1 week later, as part of an expanding investigation, inspectors discovered the remains of 63 more infants and fetuses at Perry Funeral Home, just a few minutes away from Cantrell, where the initial 11 infant bodies were discovered. According to authorities, despite the proximity of both establishments to each other, these cases were completely unrelated. Just like Cantrell, Perry Funeral Home faces repercussions for several licensing and possibly even criminal violations. That's all for this episode. Remember, you may not believe it, but anything is possible in a world so seriously strange. Dolls have the potential to be a child's very first best friend, but is there something more than stuffing, plastic, or porcelain lingering behind those glazed, emotionless eyes? Could the doll you hold so close while you dream be your worst nightmare? Imagine you're about to go to bed, you pull back the sheets, and you're just ready to set yourself down, when all of a sudden you hear a faint crying, a baby crying, and it's coming from your basement. This was the frightening reality for an owner of Mandy, an old doll said to be around 100 years old. Her owner would keep Mandy tucked away in her basement, a place where old things often are kept. Mandy's owner would investigate the crying and usually find a window open and a breeze coming through. The owner couldn't really explain the crying until she eventually donated Mandy to a museum. Once Mandy was gone, so was the crying. But this posed an interesting situation for the museum that took her in. Employees would immediately take notice of the sudden eerie changes that swept through the workplace. Once Mandy showed up, other things began to go missing. Some coworkers would complain of lunches taken from the refrigerators and stuffed away in drawers. Some would notice that office supplies like pens would go inexplicably missing, along with photographs and other personal items. A number of visitors would comment on the doll's creepy, cracked face. Other visitors might comment on how Mandy's eyes would seem to follow you as you walked by. Eventually, Mandy was moved into an area with other dolls. This didn't last very long, however, as Mandy would get jealous. Without explanation, other dolls would be harmed if left alone with Mandy. Mandy is the main attraction at the museum, and she brings a great number of people through every year, but if you'd like to take a picture, you might just find that your camera will malfunction, as Mandy is very picky about her photographers. Mandy continues today to tempt visitors from all over to come and see if they can have a strange experience themselves. Creepy? Sure. Horrifying? Not so much, but we're not done yet. Robert Eugene Otto, simply known by his nickname of Gene, was a very special boy who received a very special gift. Legend has it that voodoo had a very prominent place in Gene's young life. In the early 1900s, Gene was gifted with a doll from a Bahamian servant who, for whatever reason, was displeased with Gene's family. The doll was about the same size as Gene at the time, and even looked a bit like him. Gene became attached right away. The family, unknowing of the darkness that lingered inside the doll, didn't think much of it at first. Hearing a child talk to his or her doll isn't odd in the least. Hearing the doll talk back, however, can be a bit more disconcerting. When at first they thought Gene was simply speaking in a different voice on the doll's behalf, his family soon came to realize that the doll was actually responding to their son. But they weren't the only family that began to feel a bit strange about Gene's new companion. While the family would be out of the house, neighbors often notified them upon their return that Robert the doll could be seen moving from window to window and peeking outside. And as time progressed, so did Robert's activities. Apart from the entire family occasionally witnessing Robert running across hallways or into different rooms, Robert did enjoy getting Gene into a bit of hot water from time to time. He would often make messes or break things. Gene would sometimes scream in the middle of the night, and when his parents rushed to see what was wrong, they'd find his room to be an absolute disaster. Gene wasted no time in pointing at his beloved companion and exclaiming, "Robert did it." Gene went on to become a prominent artist and always had Robert by his side until he died in 1974. Robert had managed to scare a number of people while the house was being sold to a new family, including a plumber who was working on a toilet when he suddenly heard an eerie giggle, turned around and saw that Robert the doll could move by himself. He promptly fled the house and refused to go back inside. Eventually, a family moved into Gene's old home in 1974, and Robert found a new companion in a little girl. But the family came to suspect something was amiss when the girl would wake up her parents by screaming and claiming that Robert had tried to kill her. Despite this, his new owner kept him until she donated him to a museum in 1994. Now Robert spends most of his time on display in Key West, Florida, where visitors often claim to see Robert's expression change. Much like Mandy the doll, Robert doesn't much care for electronics. Many people won't be able to take pictures or make phone calls unless they ask Robert for permission first. Near Robert's display, there are a number of apology letters posted on the walls from people who had taken pictures or made phone calls without asking Robert for permission first. They found from that point forward their lives to be a bit unlucky. You really must be careful in those old antique shops. It was an antique shop in 1970 where a mother who was looking for a unique gift for her daughter Donna came across a Raggedy Ann doll that seemed to be the perfect fit. Donna was about to graduate nursing school and was more than pleased with receiving the doll as a gift. Donna brought the doll with her to her apartment where she roomed with another nursing student, Angie. Donna often kept the doll on her bed where it would lie motionless. For a little while, anyway. Eventually, Donna would come home to find that her doll had changed positions. At first, the changes were only subtle, and she figured that perhaps someone had bumped the bed. But eventually, the changes became much more pronounced. The doll would change positions completely, sometimes sitting with arms and legs crossed. Sometimes the doll wasn't even in the same room it had been left in. Perhaps it was a small prank played from one friend on another, but they came to realize that this Raggedy Ann doll was no prank at all. Eventually, Donna and Angie would return to their apartment to find the doll standing up on its own, leaning against a chair, frozen in place. The doll was full of stuffing. There was no way it could stand on its own, but there it was, almost as if it had frozen just when Donna and Angie came through the door. The girls, a bit unsettled by the activity, confided in a mutual friend named Lou. Lou was convinced the moment he laid eyes on the doll that she was evil. Despite this, Dawn and Angie decided to keep the doll. They didn't suspect anything sinister was afoot, but they were very, very wrong. The doll continued to get into positions by itself that no one could replicate, but a new addition to her routine came to surface when little notes began to appear around the apartment, and in child's handwriting read things such as, "Help us," or "Help Lou." Dawn and Angie at this point began to suspect that a friend might have obtained a copy of their apartment key and was sneaking in and setting up an elaborate prank. In order to prove this, they sent up numerous subtle little traps around the apartment. The doll still moved. The traps were never disturbed. Things began to shift into a creepier direction when Dawn and Angie came home one night to find that the doll had gone from the living room into Donna's bedroom. This wasn't a surprise at all at this point, but when Donna entered the room, she discovered that her beloved doll was bleeding. They contacted a medium who spun an elaborate story that a young girl named Annabelle Higgins died a long time ago in the area of their apartment and simply moved the doll around to get attention. She wanted to be loved. Donna and Angie were taken up by the story and saw no reason to cast out the doll that they now called Annabelle from their lives. That turned out to be a dreadful mistake. Lou tried to convince them to get rid of the doll, but they refused, claiming that doing so would be like abandoning a child. Annabelle didn't take kindly to Lou's distaste for her, and one night, Lou awoke in his own home from a bad dream to find Annabelle over him, strangling him while he remained paralyzed in his bed. He blacked out and woke up the next morning, convinced it wasn't a dream. Lou wasn't deterred by Annabelle's warning, however, which only led to him getting attacked once more in Donna's bedroom while Donna was out of the apartment one night. Angie was there to witness it, and upon inspection had discovered that 3 large claw marks were gashed across Lou's chest. They were bleeding considerably and irradiating a great amount of heat. The 3, now convinced Annabelle was sinister, came into contact with legendary demonologists Ed and Lorraine Warren, who were shocked that the girls would believe what a spiritual entity would have a medium tell them. They determined that Annabelle was not in fact haunted herself, but was a conduit between Earth and hell. After an exorcism was performed, Ed and Lorraine weren't exactly convinced that the demon that had been playing with Annabelle was gone. They were right. So they decided to take the doll home with them. Even on the drive home, Ed and Lorraine were forced to drive extra cautiously, as Annabelle would cause the car to swerve and stall at the most dangerous times. After more terrifying incidents involving the doll, which is claimed to have even left one person dead, Annabelle remains locked up in the Warrens Museum of the Occult. Ed Warren passed away in 2006, and Lorraine is in her 80s. She claims that though Annabelle has been unable to escape her case, she does occasionally change positions and growl at unwary visitors. So make sure to be careful where you buy your toys from. You never know when your toy might end up playing with you. That's all for now. Remember, you may not believe it, but anything is possible in a world so seriously strange. I'm Rob Dyke, and I'll see you next Wednesday, so don't forget to subscribe because you won't want to miss what's next.
Get your butt in the game in Fabletics. At Fabletics, we're known for leggings that look as good as they feel.
Deviating from what is normal, some people spend years trying to do just that, while others, well, it kind of just falls right into their lap. Most siblings have trouble getting along from time to time, but imagine the siblings being attached. Giacomo and Giovanni Tocci were born in Locarno, Italy between 1875 and 1877. The delivery process of the twins seemed to have been fairly simple since both babies were small in size. Both of the boys' parents were in a complete state of utter shock, however, when greeted with dicephalic conjoined twins. The initial shock in their appearance resulted in their own father experiencing a mental breakdown, sending him off to a month-long recovery evaluation at a lunatic asylum. Both Giacomo and Giovanni were joined at their 6th rib and shared 2 legs, the same genitals, and intestines. Despite the odds being stacked against them, the boy's father had an interesting plan in order to make the family some extra money. At 4 weeks old, the newborn twins were escorted from their hometown to the city of Turin, Italy. Their father desired additional financial income and thought it would be best to take the boys to Turin's Freak Show, where professors from the Turin Academy of Medicine could further exhibit the children. Astonished by the conjoined twins, Giacomo and Giovanni went on to serve the remainder of their childhood and adolescent years being exhibited in front of the public as a form of entertainment throughout major cities in Europe. Their popularity grew substantially over the course of their time with the Freak Show, and together, Giacomo and Giovanni became known as the Two-Headed Boy. Though the twins shared one body, both possessed polar opposite personalities and were intelligent individuals that spoke Italian, German, and French. Giovanni appeared to be introverted and enjoyed drinking mineral water, while Giacomo appeared to be extroverted and enjoyed quenching his thirst with beer. Unable to walk, they could only stand, and would either use a wheelchair to move or crawled around on the ground whenever possible. In 1891, the boys traveled on an extensive American freak show tour that earned them $1,000 a week. Intriguing many across America, their one-year tour turned into a 5-year public exhibition. With their overwhelming earnings, the boys were able to eventually retire in 1897 and lived out the rest of their days in a villa in Venice, Italy. The long years of being used as a form of entertainment caused the twins to stay hidden in their villa, as they both desired privacy from the public eye. Giacomo and Giovanni married 2 women in 1904, however, numerous reports speculate whether the two were actually dead or alive throughout the early 1900s. Together, the conjoined twins remained hidden from the media and led private lives together. It is not known when they passed away, or if they ever had their own children. She was said to be the sweetest little farm girl you would ever meet, and just wait until you get a look at her legs. Myrtle Corbin was born on May 12, 1868 in Lincoln County, Tennessee to William and Nancy Corbin. Doctors immediately noticed that the newborn suffered from dipygus, a congenital deformity that caused her to develop her own pelvis while carrying the pelvis and underdeveloped legs of her twin. Out of all 8 siblings, Myrtle was the only child to develop a rare medical deformity. Regardless of the spare pelvis and legs, her family reported that she thrived and was a perfectly healthy child. At the age of 13, Myrtle joined the sideshow circuit and was known as the four-legged girl from Texas. Though she physically exhibited 4 legs, only one leg was dominant over the rest due to a single clubbed foot and the 2 small legs which she could move, but she could not use for walking. Her main attraction was to dress up her extra limbs in stockings, and because of this, she would go on to earn as much as $450 a week. Being the unique figure she was had caused other performers to try to recreate her unusual physical appearance with phony limbs once she had left the sideshow business. Though she was successful in her adolescent years, Myrtle went on to get married when she was 19 years old, and together they settled down, having 4 daughters and 1 son. Doctors were able to conclude that each pelvis contained reproductive organs, which successfully gave her the ability to conceive. Due to her extraordinary condition, Myrtle was featured in a number of medical journals throughout her life. Her incredible condition caused a major impact in the medical world, and on May 6, 1928, Myrtle passed away surrounded by friends and family in Cleburne, Texas. In 1885, Martin Emmerling was born in Nuremberg, Germany, and seemed like just a normal boy. Growing up, Martin didn't appear to have any external deformities. However, he was born with a twisted spine. As a young adult, he was able to train himself to twist his head a full 180 degrees. Martin knew he could make a living from his talent and decided to move from Germany to America with other European sideshow performers in 1921. It didn't take long for him to pursue an incredibly successful career performing with popular sideshow businesses such as Ripley's Believe It or Not and the Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey. His increase in popularity inspired him to change his name to Martin Lorello, but he took on a number of different names such as the Human Owl, the Man with the Revolving Head, and Bobby, the Boy with the Revolving Head. His unusual talent did leave many skeptical. When confronted, Martin stated that it took him 3 years to train his body into twisting abnormal lengths. The training had caused Martin to dislocate vertebrae and even caused him to lose complete air circulation while twisting his head on stage. His acts caused him to attract massive crowds wherever he went and landed him on TV shows throughout the 1930s to 1950s. Martin was also known for training dogs and cats on stage, making them perform acrobatic tricks at his command. Though he did appear to be an amazing man who left his audience feeling amused and disturbingly unsettled, he didn't seem to carry the best reputation off stage. Sideshow performer Priscilla the Monkey Girl Bajano described Martin as a Nazi and an extremely unpleasant man. In 1931, Martin was arrested by police in Baltimore after abandoning his wife in New York. Martin's last recorded appearance was on the show You Asked For It in 1952. It would be 3 years later, in 1955, when he would suffer a fatal heart attack at the age of 70. No one has since been able to display the same exact abnormal talents as Martin, making him an incredible part of sideshow history. That's all for now. Remember, you may not believe it, but anything is possible in a world so seriously strange. Thank you for watching. Please be sure to push subscribe so you don't miss the next episode of Seriously Strange, and I will see you next time. Mothers. They can either make you into a normal, functioning member of society, or they can completely screw you up for life. And in some instances, mothers can be so twisted that they may just leave you dead. Having a new child in the family can turn lives upside down, especially at a young age. Parents become sleep-deprived or even forgetful, like this mother out of Bloomington, Illinois, who forgot her child for an entire night. On December 21, 2013, Elizabeth Potts left her child dressed in a snowsuit with a blanket covering her face in her husband's car overnight. During the night, the 11-week-old child nearly suffocated but didn't die until nearly a year later, on November 23, 2014, from brain damage resulting from the incident. Elizabeth and husband Timothy Crafton were held accountable for involuntary manslaughter, child endangerment, and 2 counts of obstruction of justice for initially lying to authorities. Elizabeth Potts was finally sentenced to 3 years in prison, while Timothy Crafton served 2 years for the negligent death of their child. While children may not like taking their medicine, in the long run it is ultimately to help them. In this case, however, children would be right to think twice about taking their pills. Following a lost custody battle on June 16, 2015, Nargis Shafirad hatched a plan to kill her 5-year-old son Daniel Dana and make it look like an accident. First, she struggled with Daniel, cutting and bruising his head before force-feeding him an entire bottle of Benadryl, enough to kill 2 adults, and enough to stop Daniel's heart. After, she drove her son's body to a road in Montgomery County, Maryland, where she set the car on fire with herself inside, feigning a car accident. Nargis was pulled out of her car alive but suffered 2nd and 3rd degree burns on almost half of her body. Then authorities uncovered the entire murder plot. Nargis pled guilty to 1st-degree murder and arson for her son's death and was sentenced to 50 years behind bars. It's the role of a parent to discipline their children. A stern talking to, a brief grounding, or even a spanking could be argued as appropriate in certain circumstances, but this mother personally administered the death penalty. Michelle Blair was a mother to 4 children, 2 of whom she claimed were sexually abusing their younger sibling. It is unknown if this is true or not, but Michelle's punishment was death. 9-year-old Stephen Barry was beaten in the head, choked with belts, and forced to ingest Windex. After this, she had his genitals scalded with boiling water. 13-year-old Stony Blair was beaten, burned, and eventually suffocated with a grocery bag. After killing her children, Michelle stacked their bodies on top of one another in a deep freezer where they went undiscovered for years. The 2 surviving siblings were burned with clothing irons and beaten with 2x4s, leaving one with over 25 scars on his back. The court claimed that Michelle had no evidence her children were sexually assaulting their sibling. Truly remorseless, when asked about Stoney's death, she said it was intentional and that she'd do it again, though she claimed Stephen's death was unintentional despite his immense suffering. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Having a child means rearranging your belongings to ensure no hazard or harm comes to them. This mother failed in one of the worst ways possible. Tantania Manners, a self-proclaimed full-time mommy, was talking to friends outside her Yonkers, New York apartment on May 25, 2015, when she heard a gunshot from inside. Tantania and her friends rushed into the apartment to find a grisly sight. Tantania's 4-year-old daughter, Michaela, had shot herself in the face with a semi-automatic handgun. Amazingly, she was expected to survive, but unfortunately didn't make it. Tantania was taken into custody years later on April 12, 2017 for child endangerment. Not only was the child around loaded firearms, but also the distribution of narcotics permitted by the mother. Tantania was brought back to Westchester County Jail and is due back in court soon. With technology advancing by the day, escaping reality on a whole new level is becoming easier, even for parents. In 2010, Kim Yo-chul and Choi Mi-sun became obsessed with an online game, playing 6 to 12 hours at a time at an internet cafe, all the while ignoring their 3-month-old child. While they raise their in-game virtual child, their newborn starved to death after suffering from severe malnutrition. After psychological evaluations, the mother received no jail time, while the father received only 2 years. The 25-year-old mother has another baby on the way. 31-year-old Shabora Thomas was caught by a neighbor acting suspiciously while taking out large trash bags. After claiming she needed to move away as soon as possible, a terrifying truth was uncovered. The neighbor asked where Shabora's children were, noticing their absence in the wake of the mother's busy day. She plainly admitted to drowning them and hiding their bodies under a neighbor's home. Initially, Shabora's matter-of-fact tone was brushed off as a joke, but after repeating her story, police took her into custody. In a statement, Shabora confessed to filling a bathtub with water after picking the kids up from daycare, then drowning her daughter first before doing the same to her son. The children were only 7 and 5 years old. Shabora had no history of mental illness and was charged with capital murder after police confirmed the locations of the bodies. As for the reason behind the murders, it is unknown what brought the mother to kill her children so heartlessly. The world needs foster mothers to care for the abandoned children, but under the so-called care of this mother, abandonment probably would have been a better circumstance. 41-year-old Jacob Sullivan raped his adopted daughter Grace for 3 years from ages 15 to 18, all the while Jacob's partner, Sarah Packer, was aware of the abuse. One day, Sarah watched Jacob perform the monstrous act on their daughter to satisfy a rape-murder fantasy. They then gave Grace a lethal dosage of Tylenol PM, but despite being bound, gagged, and left in the attic, Grace survived into the next day. However, when Jacob saw she was still breathing, he strangled her to death. The couple then stuffed her body with cat litter and left her in the attic for several months, telling everyone she had run away. Supposedly, Sarah was the foster mother of 30 other foster children and was collecting money from the government after Grace's death, totaling at least $4,000. The mountain of charges led Sarah to waive her hearing as of February 2017. The cases for both murderers are ongoing. Child abuse is always wrong, but in this case, a life was saved because they were abused in public. 3-year-old Zoe, daughter of Kathleen and Kenny Sanchez, was only 19 pounds and looked severely malnourished. A deputy for Lakewood Police noticed the father striking the child at a disabled American veterans store. Kathleen and Kenny claimed that Zoe had an eating disorder, but they were allegedly starving her to death. Zoe and her 2-year-old sister were eventually taken from the home and adopted by Amy Arellano, who said Zoe would ask for food but had difficulty eating as she feared being hit or having her food taken from her. After fleeing police and changing their appearance, Kathleen and Kenny were caught by authorities. While Kathleen claimed she didn't abuse Zoe and was adamant she was the victim of losing her children to protective custody, the real victims were the children. Thankfully, they are safe now and have plenty to eat. On November 22, 2004, Dina Schlosser went far for her religion. Believing that God required the arms of a child, Schlosser amputated her 11-month-old daughter's arms with a knife while singing along to the gospel song, "He Touched Me." After, she called 911 to explain what she did, but by the time police found her, the child was fatally injured and later died. She was found not guilty on the basis of insanity and was admitted to a hospital. After being released a second time, she was fired from Walmart after working there under her maiden name. As a mother, Mary Beth Tinning seemed plagued by infant death, losing 9 of her children in 14 years. But this was no tragic accident. Doctors reported many of the deaths were a result of bad genes, but this theory fizzled out when one of the victims had no blood relation to Mary Beth. Addicted to the sympathy she received from her dead children, she smothered several of her own children to death, with none making it past infancy. On February 4th, 1986, Mary Beth confessed to killing 3 of her children, and though she was only sentenced for the murder of 1, it is unclear if more died at her hands. As the case became more complicated, she tried to say her confession was coerced. As of February 2017, she has been denied parole for the 6th time. She is still alive in prison today. Thank you for watching. I've recently released exclusive merch featuring a number of pieces from Seriously Strange. Now you can get the design that have been on many of the shirts that I have worn on shirts, hoodies, mugs, and more. Just check the link in the description below to visit my store and get your merch while it's still there. Your purchases help to keep my channel running. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to check out my Patreon, watch another video, and of course subscribe to my channel, because you won't want to miss what's next. And I'll see you next time.
Hello?
Hello there. Almond Joy is tropical.
Children are the epitome of innocence, until they're not. Eric Smith was a peculiar 13-year-old boy. A victim of bullying, he was often teased for the way he looked. Beside his red hair and freckles, Eric wore large, thick glasses, which were supported by a pair of low-set ears that protruded unusually from the top. Eric was a loner, often seen riding his bike around town for hours on end by himself, unable to fit in with other children. He was described by his grandparents as a child who liked to goof around a lot and often sought attention. In the summer of 1993, Eric took part in a recreation program. It might have done well for him to get out and socialize with others in a different type of environment, despite his poor experience with it in the past. Derek Roby, at only 4 years old, was also attending the program. His mother would usually walk him as he was less than a block from where it was held, but that particular day, she had been tending to his younger brother. Derek assured her he could walk himself, and she let him go. Just 5 minutes later, the Roby family's lives would be forever changed. Derek walked down the sidewalk, quickly approaching his destination, when Eric Smith just so happened to be riding by on his way as well. Eric pulled his bike over and lured Derek to an area away from the road. Once there, Eric began strangling Derek. Being 9 years younger, he couldn't put up a sufficient fight. Eric choked him to near death before digging up a couple of large rocks and dropping them on Derek's head, killing him. From there, he ripped off Derek's clothes, sodomized him with a stick he found nearby, and dumped the Kool-Aid from Derek's packed lunch into the gaping wound in his head. Eric hadn't simply killed Derek, he stuck around to enjoy what he had done. Days after the murder, Eric had dropped by the police station not to confess, but to try to aid police in solving the case. He nonchalantly spoke with investigators and joyfully gave them information about what Derek was wearing the day he was murdered. But investigators only believed that Eric was a witness at first. Derek Roby was buried in his baseball uniform on August 7th, 1993. Eric confessed to the murder 2 days later. Eric was given the maximum sentence for juveniles, 9 years to life, and he continues to serve today. Though he insists he is no longer a danger to society, he has been denied parole multiple times. His next hearing will be held in April of 2016. Sometimes evil can be so overwhelming that it simply must be shared with others. Mary Bell was born in 1957 to a 17-year-old prostitute and was fathered by a habitual criminal. Living in a slum without adequate love or care, Mary lived a terrible life. From claims that she was forced into sexual acts with men since the age of 4, to her own mother trying to kill her numerous times in the earliest years of her life. Mary, as expected, was morphed into something a child should never become: a monster. Mary had began attacking and choking a number of other children, and she was firmly reprimanded for it, but no further action beyond that was taken. Mary was only 10 years old when her acts of violence became lethal. She had managed to corner a 4-year-old boy named Martin Brown in an old derelict house, where she strangled him to death. Investigators believe that Martin's death was accidental, as there was an empty pill bottle near his body, but that assumption would prove costly, as Mary's darkness only grew darker. A short time after Martin's body was discovered, Mary took a walk to his family's house. When his mother had answered, she asked to see Martin. His mother reminded her that Martin had unfortunately died, and she replied, "Oh, I know he's dead. I wanted to see him in his coffin." A couple of months after her first murder, she began to crave another. This time, she enlisted the help of her 13-year-old friend, Norma. They managed to trap a 3-year-old boy named Brian Howe. He was strangled to death, just as Martin was. But criminal behavior does tend to evolve, and Mary's sadistic cravings were no exception. Mary later returned to Brian's body and, with a razor blade, carved an N into his stomach before switching hands and turning the N into an M, possibly to signify the first letter of each girl's name. She then used a pair of scissors to cut off some of Brian's hair, slash into his legs, and mutilate his genitals. Mary and Norma were eventually caught, and when they were told by investigators that they would be charged with the death of Martin and Brian, Mary said, "That's all right by me." Mary was released from prison in 1980 at the age of 23, and she's now in her 50s and a grandmother. In some hearts lurks an evil that could never be changed. There are few cases darker than the story of Jesse Pomeroy. Jesse was born in Boston, Massachusetts in 1859 to a widowed dressmaker. Jesse looked different from other children in a way that sounds like it came right out of a horror movie. Jesse's right eye was almost entirely white. Not much is known about Jesse's upbringing, but by the age of 11 he had developed a habit of taking younger boys to secluded areas, stripping them of their clothes, and tying them up. After this, he would punch and kick them until their entire bodies were bruised. Jesse's dark desires began to evolve, however, and eventually he would begin to cut his victims with a knife and knock out their teeth to disfigure them. Having such identifiable features, victims were able to easily assist the police in finding their attacker. Jesse was caught and sent to a reform school where he was to remain until he was 21 years of age. But Jesse was smart. He kept on his best behavior and led the staff at the school to believe that he was a changed boy, that he would be safe to release to the public once again. So instead of staying there for the 10 years he was supposed to, he was released after only 2. Jesse wasted little time. He had beaten and mutilated a 10-year-old girl to death, and a month later had taken a 4-year-old to a secluded area and cut him up so badly that he was nearly decapitated. The police knew of Jesse's reputation, and they knew that he had just been released from reform school. He was taken in, interrogated, and thanks to an overwhelming amount of evidence, was charged. Though he was initially given the death penalty, there was a great outcry against sentencing a child to death. He was eventually sentenced to life in solitary confinement, and he spent almost the rest of his entire 58 years on Earth there. A reporter described him as a deadened creature, gazing with lusterless eyes upon a world that meant nothing to him. The child might be the last person you suspect of murder, and that's exactly what these children were counting on. That's all for now. Remember, you may not believe it, but anything is possible in a world so seriously strange. I'm Rob Dyke, and I'll see you next Wednesday Please show the artist of this series some love by subscribing to her YouTube channel linked in the description below. Also, be sure to subscribe to my channel because you won't want to miss what's next.
In Utah, you're living on mountain time, and there's nothing standard about that. With 10 resorts less than an hour from Salt Lake International Airport, mountain time means more time on more resorts on the greatest snow on Earth. It means more time.
There are people out there who are really good at figuring out a mystery, and then there are mysteries that are really good at never being figured out. Just because you've lived in the same home for years and years doesn't mean you're not in for some surprises every now and again. William and Minnie Winston were an elderly couple in the mid-1980s who had been living happily together in their Atlanta home for over 20 years. They had shared a lot of experiences together in that home, but eventually an experience came that sent a chill down their spines unlike any other. When Minnie, awakening one night, came across blood splattered on the bathroom floor. Minnie quickly woke up William and they both inspected the house to find blood spatter in more than just the bathroom, and they promptly contacted police. Police initiated an investigation but weren't exactly prepared for what they'd find. Inside the house, not only was blood found in the places the Winstons had specified, but it was now found in the bedrooms, on the walls, in the basement, in the kitchen, and under a television set. The amount of blood found was considered to be alarming. Police naturally sought a reasonable explanation. However, they found it a bit hard to come up with one. William regularly underwent kidney dialysis at home, so police assumed that it must have somehow been William's blood, but Minnie insisted that it wasn't. Police decided to collect samples of the blood and took them in for testing, which revealed that the blood was human and type O. Only problem was that William and Minnie were both type A. The origin of the blood still remains unknown to this day, and William and Minnie are long gone. But it is said that the house that bled in southwest Atlanta is still currently occupied. For many people, when bedtime comes, silence is golden. But for Jacqueline Cadow, there was no such thing upon lying her head on her pillow. When nightfall arrived and Jacqueline settled herself into bed, somewhere outside her bedroom window would come a wolf whistle, a whistle often used when a man might find a woman attractive. Over and over, every night, Jacqueline soon became restless, unable to sleep comfortably or find a person responsible. Jacqueline did her best to go about living her life. She had a relationship to tend to, after all. She was deeply in love with a state trooper and eventually announced her engagement to him. How wonderful. But this is when things started to change. The one known simply as the Phantom Whistler had heard the news. The whistling turned from taunting wolf whistles to the tune of a funeral march. At the tail end of each song, the Phantom would break into a blood-curdling moan. Jacqueline and her family were terrified. They couldn't escape the Phantom. He seemed to know every detail of Jacqueline's life, and he was very displeased by her decision to marry, and would often call her at home to tell her that he'd kill her if she went through with the wedding. But soon the Whistler wasn't bound by limitations of the night. Jacqueline, while at work one day, suddenly heard that familiar whistle once again, as she had every single night, and in terror and disbelief collapsed. Yet again, those who searched came up empty-handed. No one could capture the Phantom, leading some to believe he was exactly that. Jacqueline's plight reached newspapers, and even with people passing by her property to try to catch a glimpse of the Phantom and law enforcement actively seeking out the one responsible, no one ever saw a thing. Eventually, Jacqueline stayed with relatives, being unable to remain at home anymore due to the torment from the phantom. It didn't work. Outside the bedroom window came an all-too-familiar whistle, a funeral march just as before. When she moved to stay with her fiancé's family in another attempt to get away, her mother received a phone call. The voice told her mother to tell Jackie that he knew she was staying with her fiancé's family. But Jacqueline was undeterred by the elusive phantom whistler. She married the love of her life regardless, and the phantom whistler never stayed true to his promise. If he had been in attendance that day, he never said a word, nor whistled a single tune. Jacqueline's state trooper husband kept her safe from the phantom, who faded back into the shadows for good. Have you ever heard a suspicious sound coming from somewhere inside your house? Probably nothing, of course, just your imagination getting the best of you. Unless it's not. Hinterkaifeck was a small farmstead in 1920s Germany that housed an extended family, an older couple with their widowed daughter and her 2 young children aged 7 and 2. The family also kept a maid in their employ until one day when the maid decided that it was time to go. She complained that the house was surely haunted and that she was very uncomfortable staying there, not worth the money. So she packed up her things and quit, leaving the creepy farm behind. Truth be told, this decision was the best one she could have made. Though the family didn't exactly buy into anything paranormal happening with their farm, there were a few peculiar things that happened that the father made his neighbors aware of. He told them one winter, 6 months after their maid had left, that he had found a mysterious set of footprints out in the snow, leading from the darkened tree line towards his farm. The footprints only went one way and did not extend past his farm and did not return back to the trees. Unfortunately, he thought little of this. The family went on to experience strange noises coming from the attic, some of which sounded like footsteps. They found an odd newspaper that had no place being on their farm, and their house keys went missing. None of this was reported to the police, and the family continued on business as usual, which would turn into a very terrible decision. The family decided to hire a new maid. The woman arrived at the house just before nightfall. Such poor timing. That very night, only hours after the maid had arrived, the entire family, including the maid, were slaughtered. One by one, members of the family were led into the barn where they were chopped to death with a mattock. The father, mother, their daughter, and her daughter were all brutally murdered. Afterwards, the killer stalked inside the house and butchered the daughter's 2-year-old son in his cot before moving into the maid's chamber and massacring her. The murders went unreported for some time as neighbors still saw smoke rising from their chimney. When neighbors notified police that no one from the family had been seen in days, they went to investigate and stumbled upon the gruesome scene. Whoever had murdered the inhabitants of Hinterkaifeck had remained on the property and was even sure to have fed the animals. Though there was a large amount of money and valuables in the home at the time of the murders, it was never touched. When they found the body of the 7-year-old daughter in the barn, they had determined she had remained alive for hours after the murder of her family and had witnessed it. For unknown reasons, she had ripped out clumps of her own hair before she died. The farm was torn down the following year in 1923, and to this day the case remains unsolved. The world is full of eerie mysteries, but don't you worry too much. It's very unlikely that you'll become part of one. But I suppose that's what all of these people thought as well. That's all for now. Remember, you may not believe it, but anything is possible in a world so seriously strange. I'm Rob Dyke, and I'll see you next Wednesday. So don't forget to subscribe, because you won't want to miss it.
Experimentation, an effective way to learn about the world around us and everything in it. But the thirst for knowledge can become a sinister game when the ends justify the means. Wendell Johnson was a psychologist at the University of Iowa who dedicated most of his life to trying to discover the cause and cure for stuttering. Though he had made many great contributions to his field, there was one black mark that would haunt his name forever. Johnson conducted a study that would try to discover the relationship between a person's thoughts and feelings in relation to their stuttering, and if it could be a learned behavior. Though the study would reveal a great amount of information regarding this relationship, some argued that he went too far to obtain it. Johnson selected one of his graduate students named Mary Tudor to conduct the experiment. With a competent student to gather research, all he needed now were test subjects, and a nearby orphanage would suffice for that. So Mary gathered her supplies and ventured to the orphanage on January 17, 1939. That day, the experiment that would come to be known as the Monster Study began. Mary had gathered the students into two different groups, ones who were known stutterers and the others who were not stutterers and could speak quite well. The group with children that stuttered received positive attention and were told that their stuttering was just a phase and that they'd get through it and not to listen to anybody who might have criticized them. The group of well-spoken children received negative attention. They were lied to and told that they showed traits of a child that could become a stutterer. They were told that they must not stutter. At any cost, they must not stutter. The children, so afraid that they might stutter or even slip up on a word, began to mentally shut down. Their grades dropped off. They would develop nervous habits like snapping their fingers if they felt they might have trouble with a word. Some even refused to speak at all, fearing that they would become a stutterer if they tried. The children disconnected from their best friends, hardly speaking to them anymore. One child even ran away. Mary Tudor had felt remorse for what she had done. She went back to the orphanage 3 times after the experiment had ended. She told the once well-spoken children that they weren't ever meant to stutter and that they could speak freely, but the damage had already been done. In a letter to Wendell Johnson, she wrote, "I believe that in time they will recover, but we certainly made a definite impression on them." Unfortunately, she was only half right. Their impression was such a powerful one that some of the children lived with the damage from the study for the rest of their lives. The University of Iowa publicly apologized for the Monster Study in 2001, 62 years after it had all started. Harry Harlow was a psychologist who studied maternal bonding, or as he liked to call it, the nature of love. He would rear newborn monkeys with surrogate mothers, often made of metal and wrapped in towels. Some of the surrogates were designed to be abusive, scaring or hurting the newborn monkeys. Harlow wanted to determine whether the newborn monkeys were motivated by food or affection, and he came to discover that yes, they were motivated by affection more than food. Harlow lost his wife in 1971 and was treated before returning to work, having taken the loss very hard. But when he came back, his peers noticed that Harlow was different. His demeanor had changed. He abandoned his research in maternal attachment and began diving into the studies of depression and isolation. This is when Harlow would take a sudden and sinister turn. He took 12 newborn monkeys and divided them into 3 groups of 4. All of them were stuck in different isolation chambers. The first group for 30 days, the second group for 6 months, and the third group for a year. All of the monkeys had become seriously disturbed. The ones kept in isolation for a year barely moved once they were released. They would not play, they would not socialize, some wouldn't eat and starve to death. They were even unable to mate. But this would not deter Harlow. He developed what he called the rape rack, where he could tie the isolated female monkeys so that male monkeys could mate with them. After the females had given birth, Harlow discovered more about what the isolation had done to them. The mothers were unable to care for their offspring and would often violently abuse them. Harlow wrote, "Not even in our most devious dreams could we have designed a surrogate as evil as these real monkey mothers were." And he was right. One mother even pinned her baby down to the floor while she chewed off his hands and feet. Another crushed her baby's skull. But Harlow was not satisfied. He felt that the test didn't produce a true feeling of depression for the monkeys, so he developed something that he affectionately referred to as the pit of despair. Harlow wasn't using newborn monkeys anymore. No, he would wait until the monkeys were old enough and attached to their mothers. That's when he would rip them away and put them into a new type of isolation chamber. The chamber consisted of an inverted pyramid with slippery sides and a mesh top. The monkey would be placed in the point of the pyramid and would spend the first day or two trying to climb out, but would be unable to. Eventually, they'd give up and huddle into a corner and remain there. Even the happiest of monkeys were severely damaged upon being released. Harlow had projected his personal anguish onto his studies, and for this, has gone down in history as a monster. General Shiro Ishii was the chief medical officer of the Japanese army. He was a secretive man who seemed to be more entertained with hurting people than helping them. He was eventually put in command of an epidemic prevention department called Unit 731. Ishii oversaw a special project which involved human experimentation. In this way, he could test the horrific effects of chemical attacks on human beings and have a front row seat for the whole thing. But Ishii's curiosities went far beyond just that. He assembled test subjects comprised of prisoners such as bandits and political activists, but this wasn't a vast enough sample for him. So he saw no problem in taking in people who were rounded up by the military police for suspicious activities. These included elderly people,